Well, for more on climate change and the global battle to control it, I spoke to Tianjie Ma, managing editor for China Dialogue based in Beijing. I asked him what he thought of the Paris Agreement's progress.
I think we have made great progress. Many countries have actually ratified, including China has ratified the agreement, which means it's now fully embedded in China's domestic policy and legal framework. So we're seeing great progress being also made within China, where, for example, the country is about to peak its coal consumption, leading to expectations that the country will go into peak its carbon emissions probably earlier than expected.
And as you mentioned, you have the US and China really united in their efforts to curb emissions. So when you look at some of the reforms and developments that China has made over the last several years, how has the narrative changed?
I think the narratives in China has changed significantly, where you are seeing a great consensus being built around the need to shift away from an economy that's heavily based on heavy industry and infrastructure building towards a more service-based economic growth model. We are seeing air pollution becoming a predominant issue where the top leadership has made great commitments to tackle. So under this consensus, we're seeing new policies being made, new plans such as the 13th five-year plan with very ambitious environmental targets and climate targets. So with these targets, we're expecting to see progress both in terms of pollution reduction, but also in terms of greenhouse gas emission reduction from China.
Trump recently said that he was studying the Paris Climate Accord, that he was open-minded, but still says that nobody really knows about the reality of climate change. So when you hear that kind of talk, what does that mean for the future, you think, of the Paris Accord?
I think the future, because of that, I think it's a bit uncertain. But I think I'm also confident that at least major parties of the Paris Agreement, including China and Europe, probably are still on track of fulfilling their commitments under the Paris Accord, which provides the kind of confidence for the global community. The beauty of the Paris Agreement that it's a bottom-up approach, right? So the targets are not imposed by some kind of supranational bodies onto different parties. It's actually generated out of each party's domestic considerations and domestic efforts. So based on that, I think we're still confident that most of the parties to the Paris Agreement probably will be on track of meeting their obligations. Of course, the situation within the United States will be a concern, especially concerning whether some of the legacy policies of President Obama will be maintained, so that U.S. will also be on track of its trajectory towards a low-carbon economy.
Now, some people who might be worried about where the future of renewable energy is headed are some people working in the traditional fossil fuel industries like coal. They're worried about losing their jobs. So what are some ways that countries are either trying to offset some of those job losses or perhaps absorb them into the workforce or really get them reskilled for these jobs of the future?
Yes, I think there should be programs that take into account of this kind of shifts, massive shifts. In China, for example, the government has established a 100 billion RMB fund trying to relocate some of the workforces from this kind of traditional industries to new employment opportunities. Even the Ministry of Education has been involved in designing some of the retraining programs for a lot of the provinces where we're seeing a lot of this kind of shifts towards a low-carbon economy. So yes, I think government intervention in this regard is crucial to help workers from those industries that probably will be affected by this kind of shifts.
What can governments do to encourage local leaders, businesses and consumers to really get on board with taking on more green initiatives?
I think there should be incentives for businesses and also consumers to take into account their environmental footprints in their everyday decisions. We're talking about, for example, carbon tax or other forms of economic incentives that will be reflected in so-called pockets, the pockets of consumers or businesses, so that when they're making business decisions or everyday lifestyle choices, they could move towards a more low-carbon future or a low-carbon footprint. Things like choosing public transportation instead of owning a big SUV, for example, need to be encouraged with economic incentives from the government, or needs to be directed by different kind of marketing efforts and things like that.